All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the TWIML AI podcast. I'm your host, Sam Charrington, and today I'm joined by Wendy Foster, Director of Engineering and Data Science at Shopify. Before we get into today's conversation, be sure to take a moment to head over to Apple Podcasts or your listening platform of choice. And if you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. Wendy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sam. I'm so excited to be here. Longtime fan, first time participant.
Awesome. I'm so excited to hear that and looking forward to our conversation. We'll be talking a bit about your group at Shopify and what you do and digging into your perspective on data-centric AI and how you make that real at Shopify. I'd love to have you get us started by sharing a bit about your background and how you came to work in the field.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been a long and twisty journey. So I'll try and be fairly concise about it, but I don't think I'm actually unique, especially in the data science or machine learning field, which is highly cross-disciplinary by nature. But I started out training in the humanities, so I have a doctorate in literature and cultural studies. But while doing that work, I was oriented always toward technology studies in particular, which meant I was always hacking and kind of stretching outside of the traditional boundaries of the humanities. And when I finished that doctorate, I think, like many folks, I wanted to work in the real world. I didn't want to stay in academia, and I wanted to work in technology. So I was really fortunate to find, which was at the time, a very new integrated program. So it was at Simon Fraser University. It was a master's in interactive arts and technology, which combined humanities and sociology with computer science and art. And it was a big incubator, actually, for a lot of incredible design thinking talent that was aiming at the game industry, which was a big passion point for me. So those are kind of the two big steps that I took that I would say brought me to where I am today. Like I was fascinated by how data could be visualized and turned into experiences for end users. That was probably the first step I took into data science. And I was fortunate enough after I graduated to move to Toronto from Vancouver at the time and get a job at Kobo Books. And I think I was their first, at the time they were calling it Insights and Visualization Analytics.
Awesome. And so what do you do at Shopify?
Yeah, I do a lot of interesting things. I'll say, talk a little bit about my group. We're called Core Optimize. We're part of our core platform group. And there's two big investment areas within Core Optimize. We have a product development capacity. And if I reduce it to its most foundational, product instantiations, it's the reporting and analytics surfaces that we provide to merchants to help them understand their business better and make better decisions for their business. We have embedded within that capacity an algorithms group. So they look for opportunities for what we call horizontal leverage. And what horizontal leverage means for us is that any algorithm development we do doesn't just serve our primary group on Optimize, but can be utilized and extended by other groups across Shopify for their products. So a key product for us in that space, or a key algorithmic product for us in that space, is product categorization. So product categorization is useful for an incredibly wide array of domains. It can help reduce toil on merchant workflow, but it's also incredibly useful as a facet for search and discovery. It helps other teams make better decisions about merchant bucketing, just as some very, very small examples there.
And we wanted to talk a little bit about data-centric AI and categorization is an area that comes into play for you. Maybe take a step back, this idea of data-centric AI, how familiar are you with that? And how has that concept landed for you in thinking about the work that you do at Shopify?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually been thinking about it for probably several years, and I don't know if the framing for that existed many, many years ago, but I think when I think about differentials between data centric and model centric, like I think back to several companies ago when we were building recommendation projects, very small, like startup, and with a very enthusiastic group of engineers and machine learning experts, where we were very, very excited about all the parameter tuning we could do and very, very excited about 0.002% improvement in our model performance. And we were fortunate enough at that like startup to have a very rich, like wide and deep data set. So our data quality, just from a coverage perspective, was exceptional. And so like the data was always a rich source for us, and we really put like less attention on it than we should have, and spent a lot of time playing with micro optimizations. I don't know that if I framed it in terms of those like kind of concepts that we're talking about now at that point. But as like I moved through my career and went into different organizations, and I'll say organizations of different scale and different access to data, like those concepts started becoming more separated for me. And also at organizations of different scale, and I'll say Shopify in particular, we orient all of our decision making, whether it's technical or product, around the merchant problem. So if I talk about merchant centricity as being highly linked to a direction for teams to be data centric versus model centric, they're like they're incapable of being extricated from each other in my mind. If I care about what's doing best for the merchant and improving merchant success, I want us to care way more in our approach about data quality and data coverage than I want people to care about like the I think the micro details of parameter tuning. And I'm going to be incredibly poor and say I know someone's said it better, and I'm pretty sure it was like Andrew Ng, but it's like I think when he talks about it as like the difference between being able to make an impact and like not making an impact at all, but satisfying our engineering needs to engineer things.
When you talk about data quality in the context of Shopify, how would you kind of assess data quality at Shopify, and what are some of the things that you think about to address, maintain, improve data quality there?
Yeah, I mean, in some senses, it's linked to data governance for us. So, a big part of data quality for me is trustworthiness across our different data sets. Are we cleaning and transforming when the transformation is necessary in like appropriate ways? And when we transform it in one place, is it consistent with how we've transformed it in another? Is it reliable? Do we have good SLAs on like those data sets? And especially this is clearly particularly important for our data pipelines and our model pipelines, like ensuring we have proper service level understandings of that, both for our customers, but as well as for our internal teams who are building off of it. Are we like, I mean, we clearly a big part of like data governance is ensuring that our merchants data is well protected, so having like structures that keep us attentive to that. And for like the modeling side specifically, a piece that like I care about is coverage and freshness. So with something, to use the example of the product categorization piece, um, our merchants are incredibly unique. So in Shopify, we understand them as like entrepreneurs because their behavior is very robust to change and dynamic. Right. So it means that, like, as they see the world changing around them, they're constantly updating their products or their inventories that allow them to be able to, like, sell better and have clearly higher success for themselves. But for us, what this means is that ensuring that we're always bringing fresh data into our modeling like approaches is not just important, but it's critical. Like it's more critical than worrying about the model architecture itself. That's not to say we don't do model improvements, because also like things like something you have to update your model. You can rely on like the architectures that you kind of get for free with the incredible work that people have already done. But for product categorization, like an evolution where we did care about updating the model was bringing image data into our consideration versus just relying on textual data. So like we do care about ensuring our model is like robust, but like attentiveness to like how the data is changing underneath us, sometimes on a daily basis, is the most interesting and exciting thing for us, I think. So that's the data centricity part. Like we need to care about it because it's an integral part of how merchants behave on our platform.
Interesting. It sounds like, in a sense, you're saying that the kind of the time scale of innovation around the data versus the model is very different. With the data, it's something you're thinking about constantly, whereas with the model, there are kind of bigger boulders that you might take on, like integrating the image information, but changes to the model that come from changes to the data, the changes are fewer and further between.
Yeah, you nailed it. Absolutely. It's the dynamism of the data that I think is most important to us. And as I said, like produces better model results. The more attentive to it we are, the more we foreground coverage versus keeping tweaking accuracy of existing things we're already pretty good at. I think is like helped us be more successful with this particular investment anyway.
Mhm. Elaborate on that a bit. What does foregrounding coverage mean to you?
Yeah, so if I think about like merchant products, because we have a high degree of diversity in the types of merchants who are using like the platform, but also in the types of products they sell, and not just between merchants, but the rapidity of which merchants change and pivot their own merchandising base as well. So it's just a highly dynamic like product environment. It has to be like foregrounded so that we can understand if like what we're even inferring from them is going to be like useful for it. So the expansion of coverage piece to me is like you can get really good at it, like a category of it. Like if we're inferring product type from our product data, which was like the first step we took with this product categorization model, you can get really good at it because to a large extent, like merchandising and inventory around clothing is relatively like stable, or we can make like the gap jumps like much easier there. But our merchants who might sell clothing today might pivot and sell power tools tomorrow for like our long tail merchants, right? So it requires us to like not just be good at one very large category of product type, but to be very, very good at starting to like build out understanding of some of like those dynamic changes that are happening with transformations in industry for merchants. So we want to be equally good at inferring product type for clothing as we want to be for like home goods, as we want to be for bicycles and power tools. Yeah, it's a pretty rich tale of product types for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking as an example of this. Thinking back to my conversation, the last conversation I had with Solmaz, the former head of data at Shopify, and we spoke quite a bit about the impact of COVID on the company. And I'm imagining, as you're describing, these merchants that are selling clothes one day, and all of a sudden, you have masks pop up on the platform, and no one was selling masks before. Is that the kind of thing that you're referring to?
Yeah, I think it was probably like more acute, or you saw those changes happen more frequently during the most impactful early stages of COVID. But I would also say that like that dynamism and like adjusting your business to meet market needs, even if it's not as rapid a transformation, we see as typical behavior for entrepreneurs, like figuring out like their business models, especially in very, very early stage anyway.
So it's not just something you need to look at when we're going
No,
through a pandemic. It's
no.
just constant.
Yeah, it's always. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. And is the impact on categorization when you have wholly new products that are introduced to the platform, or is it different products offered by different vendors, or what are the conditions that most impact the categorization effort and impact coverage?
Yeah. It's probably like a bit of both, but I would say the higher interest, at least for me right now, is on merchants updating their products. Um, I mean, like one of the ways we've productized this at Shopify is merchants have what's called an administrative space when they log into the Shopify platform. And in that administrative place, they have multiple operational pages where they can do things like update their products and like shift inventory between stores if they have multiple stores. But for product type, where we're really focused is on their product page, and that's where they do their product updates, add new products, change existing products. And where we surface our inference there is in a category for them, which is called product type. So merchants have a bit of a choice here. They can choose to set their own product type, or they can use our inference. So in some ways, it's like a nice virtuous circle, because if they don't like our inference, they can use a custom type, and then we can learn from what they didn't like about our label. But it's actually like a key function for them to get that right, because the idea of a product type is connected to a product category taxonomy that isn't just useful for us in other parts of Shopify to help merchants merchandise better or market their services better, or for merchants to be able to do that themselves using themselves or third party apps. But they typically are, because they're entrepreneurs, sell across multiple channels. So that product type, like that taxonomic product reference, is actually a thing. Now, ideas of taxonomies are like not interesting to like merchants in general. They just want it to be right and exportable to like Facebook marketplaces or like Google marketplaces, right? Wherever else they like sell their products. And so like when I think of like us being able to like get this thing like right and have the highest coverage for them, I think about how they can actually use it to like amplify their success across all of the channels they care about. And if they're updating products like very, very quickly, we have to like have a real time inference, and we have to make sure that that inference is correct enough so that it doesn't become a frustrating aspect of a workflow that changes often for them. If they're a merchant who is involved in dynamic product updates, and quite frankly, most of them are, because if you're like a one or two person like organization, you're going to be constantly in those pages updating how you describe like your products, like how you even the images around them, right? Because you're always trying to like tweak and optimize that experience to find your audience and your fit. So like they're highly experimental, they change things all the time.
Thinking about that taxonomy, how much of that, or what's the relationship between human curators, taxonomists, and machine learning in creating that taxonomy?
Yeah. So for the initial stages of our product categorization, we kind of did a couple of things. We leveraged like the Google product taxonomy to have a reference point for what that tree structure should look like for merchants. And we also employed subject matter experts to help us like label those initial efforts, both within house and as like a third party service. So once you reach a certain critical mass of I mean, we focused on clothing or apparel to start with, to get right really well, because you don't need a lot of like high domain expertise to label pants effectively, or a pair of socks. So we got a lot of leverage from that. And it's also one of our biggest categories, merchant categories at Shopify. So it was a great like scaffolded place for us to start. So once we got enough good, accurate like labels to be able to have confidence in our inferences on the product type, we were able to build this experience to surface the inference into that operational page that merchants use to manage their products. And once we had that space in, then we could start expanding our understanding, right? Because of the fields that like surround that operation. So our inference, if they wanted to accept it or reject it, the custom types that they would add, product titles, product descriptions are also in that operational page, as well as tags. So additional metadata are all merchant generated. So we've been able to like kind of bootstrap the model with like subject matter expertise labeling a really well-known domain, and then start trying to stretch it into unfamiliar domains.
What's an example of domain in this case? Is it clothing to power tools, or is it more, within clothing, one to the next?
Yeah, yeah, I guess like actually all of it, if I'm being honest. So it's like clothing will have like your clearly your top level, uh, uh, I guess like product types that are like most recognizable to us. So like pants, shirts, socks. But like so you want like the ability to be able to navigate down n number of like leaves in a sock category for sure. And it gets harder clearly as you get more granular because then it becomes for merchants and I think for buyers as well. Uh, more that maybe that becomes more the domain knowledge, how you define a very particular pair of pants, like as chinos versus like blue jeans. It starts becoming just more refined. But like I think really like the parent part of like that taxonomy node is the most important one to get right. So apparel, clothing would be like the large categories, but yeah, to your point, also extending it to like other sellable domains. And I mean, like it, those could be power tools, it could be home decor and living. When you think of the broad like areas we would want to like search for useful things under, but it can also be incredibly niche. Like there's going to be massive amounts of like edge cases where there's one product that someone's selling and it's a very particular type of like, let's say like iron on badge or something, right? Yeah, so it's a really complicated like area. Like well-known domains are clearly easier to like access and learn than your edge cases.
And when did you first introduce images to the categorization?
Oh, would have been last year. Like the work on this is probably only about a year and a half old now. So it started out modeling just using the textual descriptions attached to products. So the title, description, product description, I think it was also vendor, and some of the metadata we also collect from it. So like tags that merchants would add to those product like uploads. And then it was like later on in that year, maybe it was like a handful of months later, where the model was extended to incorporate images.
The images were already in place, part of this data set, so you didn't have to collect any additional information. How did you vectorize the images, and did you already have kind of an embedding space for product images, or
There had been experiments done on it before. So if I'm recalling correctly, I actually think it was done during a hack days. Someone who I actually like, I think it was actually one person who ended up bringing over to the team had done a hack days on creating vector space for like the images. So the images, product images, are stored separately from the textual descriptions for. The product types because they're like media assets are a different like data store, right? So merging like the pipelines was like non-trivial, like absolutely, but absolutely necessary improvement to the model for us to, I think, be able to, or I mean, my feeling is that it was necessary in order for us to be able to start extending into subsequent domains and also build, I think, like real future thinking around how we want to extend the model and our understanding of products in the future. Because you look at like how merchants, as I said, they're highly experimental, and one of the things that's like really important to them, or I think images like comes into play, or us understanding the images piece better. We're not doing this today, but I'm kind of want the team to be thinking about it today is like what happens when that converts to 3D, right? So I think it's like a table stakes like activity now for when you go browsing. You want not necessarily the whole augmented reality experience that's still available in very limited spaces, but you want to be able to like touch that image on your screen, rotate it, see its dimensions. And I think like for me, the the image that's typically uploaded with a product is just a stepping stone for us to be able to do inference from 3D models that merchants might want to engage to. I mean, we support it in like parts of the Shopify platform, so it's a necessary addition.
meaning currently merchants can upload 3D or multiple perspective images?
Yeah, there's aspects through like their experience where they can like be able to like create 3D experiences for buyers to be able to like do the image like manipulation, which is I think like I consider it table stakes in terms of like buyer experience now. Not all merchants do that. But I think it's like a growing expectation that there's that affordances. Like, I mean, to an extent, it's like for a merchant to be able to provide like that image, they have to have probably a certain amount of like resources, but those are getting more and more accessible. And I do think it's a space we need to be thinking about in terms of building into anything around product understanding we do going forward.
Curious about maybe other challenges involved in this particular aspect of the project.
So there's challenges in how do I want to frame it? I mean, there's technical challenges that come with like working and productionizing with like large scale models. So this particular like work really like I think it was a primary use case. I'll say it this way: a primary use case for the evolution of our internal machine learning platform. So it was definitely pushing on technical boundaries. From a product perspective, we had to open ourselves up to like new spaces where this would be leverageable. And like as I said, we orient like all of our decisions on what we decide to put our time against on like the highest merchant problems. So this requires like the team. Maybe this is true of a lot of like teams that are building algorithms that they want to have like impact on the world outside of like their lab or like their team space, but it's it can't be a build it and they will come kind of like venture, right? It's like the decision to work on product categorization meant the team had to do a lot of like outreach to teams across Shopify to be able to identify the very best opportunities for like product fit. Right, we can build our own products around it, and as I said, that creates a bit of a virtuous circle for us because we get better and enriched data from having especially like that surface to our admin, but we also want that like that inference to be important for the company outside of our team. So creating those relationships and intersecting roadmaps is incredibly challenging, and I actually think it's like probably one of the biggest like challenges for um, uh, industry like level machine learning. It's like it's probably very very rare that one team can support like both building like the algorithm and the constellation of products around it without making those relationships with other teams. So your company also has to be at scale. It's like what we actually saw is that like working on like the algorithm and trying to like build against it almost in parallel was like an impossibility, right? So you have to be building ahead. You have to have like strategic foresight to understand whether the right things to like build. And then like making those like connections to product spaces that would benefit from it becomes so much easier. The hardest parts about it is like really just getting teams to understand the runway, right? So if you're doing like, especially if you're like building in a new space, you have like an MVP model, but you may need like like the decisions you make around how to improve it, even if it's just from a data coverage like perspective, have to be with an eye about where that like output of like that model is going to find a home. Is it for an internal application? Then you probably like build your roadmap instead of like optimization priorities around a completely different space than if you know merchant facing teams are going to leverage it, right?
You mentioned that you found it really difficult to both build the model and build the products around the model. And I'm curious that that's a little bit counterintuitive in the sense of, if you've, assuming you've got the the product domain expertise on the same team, um, minimizing communication barriers, just having everything in one place, you think you could move quicker. But it sounds like there were some inherent challenges with that, and I'm curious about those.
Yeah, it's mostly a timing thing, right? And this is true of like where you want that model like output to be useful for teams outside of yourself, where you have even less control about the staging of the product building against the algorithm development, right? So when the model development like cycle, I think this is actually true of like any machine learning work or data science work, probably generally. The cycle of how you build that is very, very different from the software development cycle or the product development cycle more generally. So the model has to be like built with we have to have some degree of confidence in it before like product opportunities can be software developed against it. Right. So I think like it's not that like the challenge is like, can we think of products to build around like the output of a product categorization model? The challenge is how do you time that for internal team? Like if we own all of the teams, product teams and the algorithms team that are building against it, like the staging is probably easier. Right. Well, it was easier for us, but we don't want to just be the only team like leveraging this output. So if we want another team across Shopify, let's say our search and discovery team, to be able to use the output of a product categorization model for a search facet, we have to understand where on their roadmap that work might be located, if at all. And if it's not, be able to influence them to put it on their roadmap and then ensure the way we're having to like optimize, if that's required, to make the output as useful as possible for that other team. Like, is our work going to be able to time out and align with how they've scheduled their work? Like, it's complicated enough to do all of those like roadmap alignments within one team. Clearly, far more possible. Much more difficult to do it with external teams, even within your own organization, especially when you're hoping, as we are, that this horizontal like asset can like help not just one team or two teams but a dozen teams, right? So it's mostly just about managing timelines and getting like other teams who don't support this kind of work, like the algorithm development work, on their own teams explicitly, understand like the actual like length of time it takes to build these kind of products, because that's also an unknown too.
Shopify recently published a blog post about Merlin, a new ML platform at the company. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between your team and that platform, and even the categorization product in that platform? Um, how do they fit together?
Yeah, they fit together very closely, actually. So, the machine learning platform is a relatively like new investment for Shopify. It's probably like I'm probably going to be mistaken here, but I think it's less than like 2 years old. So, the teams that are working in Shopify on building machine learning applications were the initial use cases for Merlin. So, the team that I support, who is building these horizontal like algorithms, were one of like the first use cases for Merlin. But again, like I say, this is from like a product against a like data platform is a product. And so building and evolving something as complicated as a machine learning platform in parallel with a team who's building large scale like multimodal models is a challenge. So we feed in like requirements and we follow along the roadmap, and as we're able to take advantage of more and more of the capabilities that the machine learning platform makes available, we migrate to them, right? So I think we started out with the algorithms team building standalone like pipelines that were built in a way that when Merlin was able to support those like on platform, like it was a fairly simple like migration effort. And same with taking advantage of like the feature store that's being built out too. It's like we're moving into like near real time inference production, and that's on their roadmap. So when they're able to support that, we'll be able to merge there. But it's an exceptional team doing incredibly hard work with an enormous amount of stakeholders across the organization. So um, I'm super happy with like their progress and their level of like partnership with us. Like they basically are filters for like the pain the team is experiencing, and that gets like roadmapped into feature sets that are prioritized by them.
We've talked quite a bit about the categorization use case. What are some other use cases that your team's been working on?
So I think like for us, the product space is not completely exhaustible if I'm talking just about like the algorithms work. But that doesn't mean the domain space of like merchant value is exhausted that we can do in much smaller efforts. So I think when we think about the large scale like data work, to me it's like a lot of it's exploratory, right? Like what large data sets do we have that we think can provide merchant value? I think we still have a lot of like mining that we need to do on the product data set specifically. But smaller areas that I think are useful for merchants that can help them understand their business better is to really help them like benchmark against themselves, like be able to have like actually sensitive instead of out of the box forecasts for their businesses. It sounds like simple work, but like the models for like supply and demand on each individual merchant use case can look incredibly like different, right? Some merchants even have, I think one merchant like described it to me as um, they have like a model where they loan things out and then get them back. And so how something like for forecasting them, if you're doing like inventory forecasting for them, would look very different than inventory forecasting for a merchant that sells something and once you sell it it's gone. They're
Yeah.
like, well, we get stuff in from distributor A and then we lend it out to a whole bunch of customers and then we wait to get that back and then we're also getting like new products from like different domains in. So they're like, how do I understand my business better? I'm like, that is a really hard challenge. Probably not super unique, especially like merchants are very creative about how they manage their businesses now, but it's enough of an edge case that it wouldn't fit into a generalizable like forecast model we might be want to be able to provide to merchants as a tool to use in their admin in our analytics home as an example. So I think that that one's really hard. I
I
think
wouldn't have
like
imagined that Shopify supported that at all. The lending use case, let alone forecasting it, but even the inventory management parts of it and some of the more basic mechanics of that business model.
yeah, the inventory like management support, I am pretty sure doesn't like account like fully for that kind of like model. So I'm positive it's not part of like our tooling, but merchants like create are incredibly creative. So um, they find ways to like use the platform for their immediate needs and then creative ways often like sometimes they contract out like new services or find third party apps that can support them to be able to extend parts of their business. So they're being creative about how they support that too. And for like one person, like merchant businesses, maybe they can maybe they can kid glove that to a large extent for themselves too. But yeah, for them, it's like really understanding how to like build that kind of business like effectively is not just a tooling challenge from any e-commerce solution they might use, Shopify in this case, but also from an understanding perspective. So the analytics products we provide need to like I don't know if we'd be able to like handle the specificities of that use case, but I don't know how flexible we can be on like building that kind of like forecasting model that allows merchants to have some autonomy over controlling aspects of how you define how that model should work. I think it's probably very similar with pricing too. Like the thing they're also interested in is like tools that help them experiment with pricing more effectively.
Returning back to this idea of data centric AI versus model centric and the way that you've incorporated that into the categorization use case, you talked about incorporating in the user provided labels into the loop. Like, how do you operationalize that?
Yeah, so we have that product like pretty well instrumented. Clearly, like you can always like we always want to improve on that because we learn more. But we know if we provide an inference, when you think of the field, it's like a light suggestion in it. So when they have the product type in their admin, it's like a grayed out. So they can say, hey, we're recommending this product type for you to use. And if they click in the text field, then it populates that text field and then they can attach it to like their inventory. But they can also choose to ignore that field, and there's an opportunity for them to enter a custom type. And also what they will do regardless of whether they select a product type or not is usually include tags, descriptive tags for their product, which is like helps to make it more discoverable. It's a really rich source of metadata for them to like leverage. So we know if they accept our suggestion, if they click in that field and then apply it to their product. So that's all part of like our product data set model.
Awesome. Well, Wendy, thanks so much for taking the time to chat and share a bit about what you and your team are up to. Very cool stuff.
Thank you, Sam. It's been a pleasure.